Some of you might have been doing a jig while you were waiting for us to go live. This afternoon, we are thankful to have with us Mr. Ian Rogers from ACE Project Solutions Limited. And I'll be introducing Ian shortly. First, we'll do some housekeeping. This is a reminder, this is a CPD that is a continuous professional development event, and it carries a value of 2 CPD points. So please contact our secretariat, which is Stacy, to have your CPD information forwarded to you, should you wish to claim those points. If you're a member of either BAPE, BIA, or another organization that is affiliated, you can just contact Stacy and she'll send you the information. Just to give you an idea of how the sessions are ran, we'll introduce our presenter and he'll present for between 30 and 40 minutes. We then will have an open session to our general audience to ask questions and interact with our guests. This is done either by raising your hand, at which time the moderator, that's me, will acknowledge you and invite you to ask your questions. Alternatively, you can post your question in the chat and I will ask the question on your behalf. We ask that you please mute your electronic device unless you are asking a question. So just some notices from the association for those who are members of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers. We do have a couple activities coming up. The Alexandra Secondary School, they are looking for some engineers to come and speak to the students for their careers day. If you're a scholar of Alexandra or this is an event that you would like to participate in, please reach out to Stacy at the office. Likewise, there is a virtual National Careers Day being put on by the Ministry of Education, and they likewise are looking for professionals. So this is for all professionals in the group. If you are interested in doing a presentation at that virtual Careers Day, reach out to Stacy and she can give you some further details in that regard. BAP members, you are reminded, for those of you who have not yet paid your yearly subscription, that we would invite you to do so as soon as possible. We're into the month of March now. And we ask that you would make yourself right with the association and pay your yearly subscription as soon as is possible. And we have a week of activities that will be coming up on the 28th of September, running to the 8th of October, and that's to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers. So we'll have some more information going out on that within the next month. So continue to monitor the various chats and wherever you get your updates from, and you'll see some information coming out to you shortly about the events that we have coming up. So we recently would have had our tour of Preconco. Kenton, if you can put up some photos. That tour was just this past Saturday, and it was a fairly successful tour. We just want to extend our thanks again to the management and staff at Preconco Limited for accommodating us this past Saturday. Several professionals were able to come out, a mixture of engineers, architects, and we had a good turnout of students as well. And Preconco was good enough to walk us through aspects of their design process, walk us through the manufacturing process, and then we were afforded a tour of the facility. So we were quite fortunate to really have gotten the opportunity to see the plant in action, to see the various stages at which the production occurs, and to also see a bit of assembly because they're doing some work internally in their yard. So persons who might have not been fortunate in the past to witness assembly would have gotten to see some panels being lowered into place. So all in all, it was a good tour. We had, I think, it was just over 40 persons turned out for that, and I think it was a successful event. So thanks again for those of you who were able to make it on the day. And we will have some images and so on put up on our website in the coming week so that persons who want to go on and just have a check on what was done there can do that. All right, so let's get on to the business of this evening. So This evening's topic is unlocking the code for successful BIM delivery of projects. And that is going to be presented by Mr. Ian Rogers, who is the Chief Executive of ACE Project Solutions Limited, which is a specialist property consultancy working internationally to deliver private sector projects, PPP structured projects, quantity surveying, project management, and FM consultancy services. ACE covers the whole life cycle of a project from inception to operational reality. So just a little bit about Ian himself. Ian has been working in the property and facilities management arena for some 45 years and has worked and/or advised on many FM and PFI projects, both in the public and the private sector. He is a chartered surveyor by training and spent the early part of his career working on large construction projects. So he knows his way around buildings and how to put them together. As a result, Ian has an in-depth experience on how buildings should operate and can therefore relate to the design of a building into operational requirements. He has a comprehensive knowledge of facilities management, maintenance, estate management, PFI, PPP contracts, and construction. Ian also fully understands the whole life cycle approach to a project and has developed a process from inception to operations to ensure projects are successful. Ian is an associate member of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, an associate member of the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Managers, an associate member of the International Facilities Management Association, and a fellow member of the Institute of Directors. So without further ado, I turn you now over to Mr. Ian Rogers. Ian?
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you for that warm welcome. I've got quite a lot to go through today, and as Vincent has so elaborately stated about myself, I've got a wealth of experience on the whole life cycle approach to dealing with buildings. And over the last couple of years, I've been looking with a couple of colleagues as to why we think projects have challenges throughout their life. And we've come to the conclusion that a number of issues arise, primarily because often the client doesn't understand what they really want from an operational point of view. They then hand that over to the design team, whilst very good at doing the design, also potentially do not fully understand the operational requirements. So as a result, you've got two parties not necessarily communicating properly and dealing with things in that order. So I'll bring the slides up. Just bear with me for a minute. Sorry, I'll just use my... Hopefully you should see the title block there. As Vincent's already said, I've got a wealth of experience. I have got two colleagues, and we're working on actually a system which we've branded ProSync, which ACE is part of. And my other two colleagues have got a wealth of experience in construction procurement and also construction systems. We briefly mentioned this is about building information modeling, or BIM, and that's what we're trying to harness by going through this process, is looking at how we think projects can be set up better and how we can use the modern day technologies to break down the silos and have an integrated collaborative team to deliver a project. So you come across the questions that the average client asks is, how late is this going to be? Where has all my budget gone? How many quality issue problems are there? What will it be like for the users? All of those things are common questions that we come across in every day-to-day life. Ending up in, how did we get into this mess? And I'm not being critical, this is just fact of life. And we've all been in projects that have had challenges all the way along the piece, such that the client ends up not getting what he really wants. Just to add some statistics to that, various studies that have been done, budgets are typically only 47 or 48% on budget. On time and on budget, only 8.5% of projects, and on time, budget, and with all the benefits and bells and whistles there, only 0.5% of projects manage to tick all of those boxes. And that is courtesy of independent assessments. There's also project assessment being done by McKinsey and Partners, who are a big international management consultancy, and they came up with the fact that 98% of projects fail. That is a pretty bad indictment of the industry overall. And this is international. This is everywhere. 80% of project costs are time related, and yet only 28% of the product, 400% of the capital spend is really looked at properly. So often we're not looking at the right elements to reduce cost. We're trying to beat the poor contractor down, whereas necessarily we might be looking at the systems and how we put the project together that generate a far better and quicker solution. So we believe, having put our system together, that we can build it better, faster, and for less. So we've got a secret code which relates around 5 principles, 4 pillars, 1 system, and 3 outcomes. So there's a lot I'm going to go through here, and bear with me, but I just want to give you a flavour of the overall picture of what I'm trying to do here for the benefit of projects overall. So it's just taking the 5 principles. First principle is we have to be completely transparent. That is, everybody in the whole team has to be transparent. We have to be fully collaborative. So everybody has to be able to talk to each other, work with each other, and work in a truly collaborative way. We need to be continuously improving. Therefore, we need to learn from our mistakes, which there will be, and how we improve those as we go along through the whole project. We need to have knowledge sharing. We mustn't keep it in our own individual silos. We must share the issues, we must share the successes and what works well. And it must be data-driven. And that is the most important part of what I believe we need to do. And I'm going to stay on the data-driven bit a little bit longer now. We all have heard of BIM and what it's supposed to do, but in my opinion, this is not set up right as well. So along with the client not necessarily understanding what they want, and the design team not understanding what the client wants, often people don't understand the data that's needed to do a project successfully. So all the data traditionally is put on the BIM model if that's being used, and the BIM model sits within the purview of the design team, often possibly the contractor. It is often set up way into the whole process, and consequently, not all the stakeholders in a project can get the data out that they really want to. So part of this is looking at what we need to do to set the project up correctly in the first place, with the project brief, if you like. But it's also about setting up the data from the very beginning so that all stakeholders can get the data out of the project that they want. I've got a colleague of mine from the UK who was really excited about taking over a large hospital that had been designed using all the BIM attributes. When he came to mobilize his facilities management, he couldn't get a single piece of data out of the BIM model on all the assets that were now in the building, because the BIM model had not been set up to extract asset data. So he had to go back to the old traditional way and put it all together from scratch. When that data was there, he just couldn't get at it. Complete waste of time and effort of how that project was put together. So that's why I was saying data needs to be considered up front along with the client's brief properly and thoroughly, spending more time on that before we go through everything else, so that we end up with a more transparent, collaborative, continuously improving process. So the four pillars of a successful project, in my mind, are the life cycle delivery process. That is critical. We've got to look at the whole life cycle. We've got to look at what the client wants to operate its building or its facility at the end game. I have a statement which basically says you need to look at the end game at the beginning, so that you actually understand fully what is required at the beginning, and therefore you can get rid of a lot of the issues that occur during the design process. Integrated digital platform, and I'll come across this a bit more. You've probably heard of the common data environment. In my opinion, there is no such thing as the common data environment. All the participants in the design team use different platforms, maybe Tekla for the structural engineering, various architectural platforms, AutoCAD and all that sort of thing. They're all digital platforms, but they're not integrated unless you make them integrated. So rather than having a common data environment, I think we need to have an integrated digital platform that all these different databases sit on, but can talk to each other properly so you can extract the data in the correct way. We've got to have people with purpose. We've got to have people that understand what they're doing properly and how they're integrating into the team. And then we've got to have knowledge and improvement hub. And those last two will come clear as we go through the process. So those are the 4 pillars. Then we come to the one system, but I need to break this one system down into a number of parts because there are a considerable number of moving parts within this one system. So we've all probably heard of the RIBA plan of work. We've taken that and looked at that in depth and realized we probably need 3 stages before the traditional plan of work starts. So we start with the project evaluation. What does the project really want? What is the vision? What is the why? It's amazing to me that many clients don't even know why they are doing that building or that facility or that structure. We then need to look in detail at the project viability. So this is where we go through what I call a project initiation document, which I've expanded from the standard Prince2 document to about 35 separate heads of gathering all sorts of information that will be useful in developing the project brief. Then we've got the project setup, which takes all of that data we've now gathered and also the information data that we will require and puts that all into one system so that everybody's talking and working on that integrated project data platform. We can then go to the funders to get funding for the project if we're needing external funding in a much more cohesive way. Then we start the more familiar process of the concept design, spatial design, technical design, moving into construction. Now, each one of these stages has what I call a full gateway review and sign-off process. So you can't go from project evaluation to project viability until all the necessary stakeholders have signed that off properly. By doing that, then you're doing a lot of internal review and making sure that you're getting everything correctly set up from the get-go. And then when you get to concept design, again, that goes through to a gateway review, the spatial design, gateway review. And at the end of spatial design, I'm saying, excuse my voice, I'm saying that we need to have a full design freeze. So nothing else can change. So everybody's got to be fully on board, fully understand where we're at that stage of the game. And then the design team can go forward into the technical design with full confidence that there's not going to be any major changes. Because at the technical design, that's where all the real work is done and where the cost of designing it is really incurred by the design team. So if they're presented with all the previous stages done correctly, then the technical design should be done as a one-stop shop. There shouldn't be any further iterations. And then once that's signed off and we go into construction and the handover phase, then you've got much more clarity of that construction work being done in a proper order. And we've also come up with a system now where we think the use of main contractors is not necessarily the best way forward. We should be using something called construction management, which some of you may have come across, where we use trade packages. Now, the software that we are using to underline all this can actually allow for micro payments for each element of each project to be paid for as and when it's done. So if you take that in the simple sense, a carpenter's fitted a door frame in a door. Once that's been checked off for quality control, he gets paid for that. We've got the systems that can allow us to do that. That's a whole host of other things that need discussing, not necessarily for today. But we're looking at the whole model here as to how it can be changed. And then when you get to the operational life cycle, everything's been thought through, everything's been put in place, and everything's been signed off. So that when you do the commissioning and hand over the building, it should be a very quick, simple process. So that the building can come on stream much quicker to earn its keep as originally intended. So the life cycle piece is a very, very important piece in terms of looking at all the elements in detail, fully transparently, and building up this database of knowledge. So the integrated digital platform, rather than the common data environment, covers a whole multitude of things. So yes, you've got the design modules on there from AutoCAD and Tekla and all of that integrated process. You've got your confederated designs and all that sort of thing. but you need to be able to bolt in so many other pieces of information. So you've got the quality management, you've got safety management modules, you've got all the budget and cost control and quantity surveying modules, you've got all your program and scheduling and monitoring. That can all be done off this database if it's set up correctly at the very beginning. So you get a rich tapestry of data that's all sat on this IDP, such that everybody can integrate and pull the data off, and know exactly who is doing what and how everything is going together. So that's the integrated digital platform, and hopefully you can see why it's not just one common data environment. It's got to be a multiple of databases that are properly linked and working together. And we have partnered with a company called Plannerly. In other words, don't plan late, plan early, which is the whole ethos of what we're trying to do. And their software system allows you to have all of your documentation integrated onto one system. You can plan, scope the document, and verify everything that's going on. So it gives you a backbone of software applications that cover a lot of this. And then we can bolt other bits in, and it is all fully compatible with AutoCAD and all the other things. So you can start to have this integrated digital platform. So people are key. We have to have a project integration leader who needs to be appointed from day one. Another saying that I say regularly is that the most important member of the design team is the facilities manager or the operational manager. They are the people that can take what the client wants and help the design team to realize that from the very early stages. But alongside that, you must have a project integration leader that can take this whole project forward, or a program manager, if you like, who can manage all of the processes, manage all the software systems, and manage everybody's integration into this one operational integrated team. So you've got the client team, you've got the operations team, you've got the supply components and all that sort of thing, and you're capturing all of that through these people who are doing this with a purpose, because they now know exactly what they've got to do, how they've got to do it, and where they've got to do it too, if you like. So you can start to see that the integration of systems and the integration of people is absolutely critical in allowing this to happen in a proper, cohesive way. And through having this, you can then really start to work with each other and understand each other. So there should be no gaps or uncertainties or surprises. And all the way along, you're building up your database of information that can go through the whole life cycle of the project. So that when the facilities manager comes on board, they know that they've signed everything off all the way through, and that they've got access to the data they need to operate the building. And therefore, maintenance can be done more effectively. The building can be managed much more in an energy efficient way because you've got all the data and everything else around it. We're also considering how you integrate the Internet of Things into this as well, so that you can actually monitor buildings in real time going forward. So those three elements of the life cycle, the digital platform, and the integrated project leader and all the people give you a knowledge hub. And what we're also saying is that this knowledge hub or integrated project delivery platform shouldn't be held specifically within the design team. That should be held by a third party for the benefit of the client, so the client has access to all the data all the way through. Now, I know there's going to be issues around IP and design and various other things when I say that, but we need to look at how that data can be taken outside of the first part of the project and taken forward into the whole life cycle of the project, so everybody has full access to all of that data, because that can allow us to manage this properly. But it also allows us to anonymize that data. And as each new project comes on board, we can learn from the previous project and all the mistakes that inevitably were going to be made there and learn from. So as you get those projects together and we build up this database of knowledge, we're getting better and better with our supercharged, how can I say it, continuous improvement circle. So therefore, we're constantly learning from one project to the next project. Now, I know each project following on is not necessarily the same. And that has always been the problem, that each project has its own nuances and differences. But if we're continuously learning from what we do in each project and how we get out of the issues and how we solve the issues and record those and move those forward, we're building up this database of real life information, which can allow us to get better, faster, and build for less as we go forward, because we're learning each time and improving each time. Even if the design team are changing, that base knowledge is always there now, and we can build on that and take it forward. So when you put all that together, we end up with one system. So you're starting to see the code of 5413. So the one integrated system on the one integrated platform, using multiple sets of databases all talking to each other properly. And yes, this is a big ask, and yes, there's a lot to pull all this together. But if it's done properly, and we believe we have the tools to be able to do this, you can really start to see the power of starting to integrate everything onto the one system. So we know where everything is, who is doing what, how that is all being dealt with correctly. So for instance, the program manager can now start to monitor the production of the project initiation document, the project brief. They can take that through into all of the setup processes. So we've got all the data requirements set up. And in terms of data requirements, we could have the building hierarchies of different buildings, as there's multiple buildings on the one site. The levels of the building, that all broken down so that we know where all the assets are sat in each individual room. And that can all go through the whole process. We even have a program where we can actually start to formulate the room data sheets for each individual room before the building's been designed. So as part of developing the project brief, as part of the project initiation documentation stage, we can sit down with the client and say, right, what are all the basic rooms that you need? And what do they need to do? And from a database that we've already got, we can start putting in all the equipment and fixtures and fittings within that room. If it's a hotel room, we know what the standards are for that particular room. The beds, the fixtures and fittings. That can all come from the standard library and then be tweaked to suit that client's particular perspective. So we start to build up the room data sheets before the design is even properly set out. Then when we get to the design stage, and particularly the spatial coordination, we can take all those room data sheets and start bolting them together in the logical way to make sure that the process flow for the use in that building operates all the way through correctly. So there's a lot of stuff that can be done, a lot of moving parts that can be put together in early doors. Yes, there's a bit more expenditure up front and a bit more time up front. But if you get all this right and you lay this all out correctly, the gain in efficiency as you go through this process is significant. So the overall duration for delivering the project is going to be less. Coupled with the fact that you'll have less rework done, less variations done, less delays and all of that sort of thing, because you've thought about it up front. So you may have taken 2, 3, 6 months more up front, but you may have saved 6, 9, 12 months of delays, disruption, disputes, and all the costs that are associated with that later on down the line. And you've got a building that really works for what it's intended to do. So hopefully you can see how this starts to integrate together. I know this is a bit of a whirlwind in terms of all the different elements to it, but hopefully you can see how this all starts to pull together in a cohesive way using everybody's information. So coming out of this are 3 key outcomes, which is the final part of the code that we have devised. So we end up building better, faster, and for less, which you've heard me say already. So better in terms of quality for the people doing the building and who will be using the building, because they'll have what they really want at the end of the day. It'll be better for suppliers because suppliers have been brought in at an earlier stage. We've captured the supply information correctly. So we've got much more information on the as-built than we would have done otherwise. It's better for the clients because they're getting what they want. They're getting it early or on time. And it's better for the environment because we've been able to design this from a sustainability point of view, bringing in all the best practices to reduce energy use, not only in the use of the building once it's complete, but also for the actual construction. So we can bring in systems that is more energy efficient in the construction process as well. So there's many better outcomes, if you like, by going through this. We reckon it is faster to build overall because the likelihood of variations is considerably reduced. It won't be totally eliminated because we're in construction and you don't know what's in the ground, or you should know what's in the ground, but there will always be the odd thing that will creep up and bite you. It'll be faster for the end user to get to a return on an investment they've put into that building. It'll be faster to get to use overall. And it'll be faster for the design team to get to the next project as well, so they can earn more fees. And for less. So less capital involved, there should be less maintenance involved, less whole life cycle costs, and certainly no surprises because we should be monitoring this, and we should be getting more product per dollar, pound, or euro, depending on where you're at. And we know that we can do this for a lot less overall, which I'll summarize in a minute. My colleague, Chris, who's been in procurement, he's actually trialed a lot of this in major prison buildings. And he knows that he can actually achieve the figures that I'm about to quote to you in terms of reduction in cost and time. So this is proven. What we're doing through our many, many years of experience across the three of us in the industry, we've brought all of our best practices that we've learned over the years and all the issues that we've had over the years and pulled this together into one holistic system of how to look at building a project in a much more efficient way. So our ambitions for this, or for you, or for the client, is this is an in-flight and beyond process. So it's not just a one-off. This is going to go through from project to project to project as we build going forward. We believe overall, typically, we should be able to build the buildings about 30% faster from inception through to operational requirements. That's a bold statement, but as I say, we've done this in the past in elements of this, so we believe it is possible. We believe overall it is about 20% less to build because you haven't got the rework, you haven't got the delays, you haven't got the variations and other issues that you have with more traditional ways of doing things because you've done it right first time. 20% less to run. We reckon that these buildings should be much more efficient, energy efficient, using all the latest materials to stop heat gain or chill loss or what have you. And using technologies like the Internet of Things, we can start to monitor buildings properly. So yes, there'll be a little bit more investment up front, but we still believe overall it will be cheaper. But we'll be able to monitor the condition of that plant and maintain it to a high degree so the occupants have much nicer environment to work in and that the overall running cost of that building will be considerably less. So we're using less energy and therefore much more sustainable. Using the Internet of Things as the latest way of hooking up all the plant to monitor it. And I've previously done condition-based maintenance in buildings a number of years ago, using more manual techniques than the technology allows you to do now. And we proved categorically by using condition-based maintenance, where you are actually only maintaining that building or that piece of equipment when it goes out of tolerance, according to the manufacturer's requirements, that we reduce the maintenance cost by 40%. So saying 20% less to run is actually a relatively conservative view. You know, 20 years ago, we were able to reduce running costs by at least 40% by using condition-based maintenance. So there should be no defects carried forward because we've had all the quality checks. We've done the micro payments, which show that every single element of the building is signed off before it gets paid for. The contractors have got better cash flow. And we have a sustainable supply chain. I mean, our view of this is the whole model needs to change such that the contractors are actually paid more for doing the work. Because at the moment, most contractors make 3 to 5% margin, which is pitifully low. So we're not here about knocking the contractors building it. We're not here about knocking fees off the design team. We're saying that by having all the project information up front, the design team can better bid the work because they know what's involved in it and they can do it properly. All that upfront cost, I think, should be much more comprehensively priced for a return on the contractors and the design team to make their jobs much better. Overall, the project starts to reduce costs because you're doing it properly from day one. You've got the proper brief. There's no rework and all of that sort of thing. So that gives you an overview of where we think this sort of system can go. So thank you for listening. I don't know whether I'm on time or where I'm at, but hopefully I'm about there on the button, and I'm sure there will be a lot of questions coming out of this. So thank you very much for your patience with me. Apologies for my squeaky voice. I am just at the end of recovering from dengue, so I'm not quite fully coherent myself at the moment.
All right, Ian, thank you so much. Quite a thought-provoking presentation this evening. And we have quite a mixed batch of persons in the chat. I can see some architects in, there are some engineers in. So let's see what interesting questions we can have coming out of this afternoon's presentation. So just to remind persons, if you are interested in asking Ian a question, you can raise your hand or you can place your question in the chat, and I'm quite happy to ask that on your behalf. So Ian, I mean, this is quite an intriguing concept that you and your colleagues have determined. When I was at university back in the early 2000s, all the rave in the UK at that point in time was pertaining to the Egan and Latham reports about working more closely together. The design team, contractors, etc., working closely together at the outstart of the project to increase project efficiencies, as basically you have spelt out. But you have gone an additional step by actually indicating that to front load the project in terms of really getting persons who will be integrally involved in the managing and running of the building for the client involved from early on, so that basically you're going into this project with your eyes fully open of what is expected and how you want that project to really turn out in the end. So, I mean, what has this come about because of the experiences or bad experiences you have had as a building manager, QS, over a period of time that would have encouraged you to look at or relook how this entire process is done?
Exactly. As your interlude to me on my career, I started off as a quantity surveyor in construction. I then went into operational facilities management, so I saw the other side of the building. And then I got involved in the PFI PPP arena, which made you really start to look at the whole life cycle of a building. And when involved in those PFI PPPs, it was just unbelievable to me, because we were part of the consortium as the operational people. We were brought in very early on. And I was working alongside architects and designers, and I'm not knocking professions at all, because it's how the industry has grown over the years. But it became evident that building hadn't been thought through operationally. From a maintenance point of view, I inherited buildings where you couldn't even take the filters out of the air handling units because they put the air handling unit tight up against the wall and not thought about it. I inherited a hospital. When I inherited it, it was already up on the roof, so it was well and truly on its way to completion. And we started looking at all the operational requirements of that building. And this was a cardiothoracic and neurosciences specialist wing. So it's 240 beds of high intense care for patients that were critically ill. The intake of those patients was between 1 and 3 a.m. in the morning, typically, because they'd gone to ER, emergency room, or whatever you want to call it, and had all of their initial stuff and stabilized. Well, it was only when they came onto the ward in the early hours of the morning that they needed all the equipment. But until that patient arrived, they didn't know what they needed. So we started saying, well, where are all the storerooms for the equipment and supplies and all that sort of thing? Oh, they're over in the main hospital because this is a new wing on a large hospital. And I said, yeah, and does that operate 24/7? No. So immediately, the people that needed the equipment wouldn't be able to get hold of the equipment, and there was no storeroom locally in this wing to store the equipment they needed because operationally the building hadn't been thought through. So we had to retrofit in an existing structure all the necessary storerooms for that unit to be able to function. Now, if we hadn't been there even at that stage, that building would have been complete. The nurses who got in, they'd started trying to operationalize their hospital and realized they couldn't work it. So it was fundamental that the operational requirements are dealt with very, very early on. I mean, I was involved in a building here, which will remain nameless. And when everybody moved in, I said, why is the finance up on the top floor and HR down on the ground floor? And we need to sit next to each other. So even in a simple office building, people hadn't thought through at design stage where the various departments need to be aligned to each other so that they can work properly and efficiently. So it's taking all of that sort of thing into account during the early stages of design by making sure that the design team are fully briefed as to what that client really needs. And if they're fully briefed, they know exactly then what they've got to design. They can then do their magic and make the building look beautiful, knowing that the heart and lungs of the building are going to operate correctly.
Yeah.
But also often the design team are not given that information and they do the best they can with what they've got. And then it's not necessarily the right thing. And the client, who often can't read drawings or visualize, it's only when they come on site, why is that there? Where's this? And that's where all the variations start coming across.
Right.
So yes, it's been born out of many years of bitter experience in the trenches, seeing what goes on the whole life cycle of the project.
Well, Ian, I can hear what you're saying, and I've lived what you're saying, so I understand completely. We have some questions coming through from Mr. Bill Waterman and DeMar Payton. So Bill's first question to you, Ian, is, hi, Ian, is your system based on the PMP PMBOK system?
I'm assuming PMBOK is a form of project management. It's not a term I'm familiar with.
Yes, the project management book of knowledge, basically.
All right, okay. I mean, our system is probably based more on Prince 2 rather than PMP, but yes, it evolves all of those basic principles and expanded it out to cover off the elements that I know need to be in there. So yeah, the basic principles of project management are there all the way through. And our ethos is that what should be bolted into the base integrated system is a software system that can do all the project management. So whether that be MS Project or Synchro or whatever the different project management tools are, they should be able to bolt into the integrated project delivery platform. So they can take out all the data they require to schedule the project correctly, and that can still be managed in the traditional project management way. But the project managers will then have far more detail available to them. And that can go one stage further because you've integrated the cost control systems into this and you've got the full bill of quantities. In my opinion, the project management schedule can then be priced properly from a cash flow point of view. So that when you're looking at progress and what things are going on, not only have you got the visual insights from the Gantt charts or the schedules or what have you, you also now got the cost backup. Because if the Gantt chart is saying it's 60% complete, but the valuations are only saying 40, clearly there's a misalignment there somewhere. And therefore that flags up issues early on as to what's going on and can be investigated. So by having all this data integrated, all the disciplines can start to feed off each other with one unified set of data so that you can actually get a true picture as to what's going on.
Very good. All right, we have a next question here from Mr. Payton, who is asking, hi there, will the presentation document be available to us to go through at our own leisure? The point person, and he's asking, the point person for this method is the engineer or the architect?
I can make the slides available to you. I can send you a PDF version of that. That's no problem.
Ian, what you can do is send those to me. We'll put them up on our website. That way everyone
Sure.
will have access.
Yeah.
So answer the question about the point person. Who do you determine to be your point person for this process?
I think it's neither. I'm going to be very provocative here. I talked about the integrated project lead or the program manager. I mean, they could be an engineer by background, or they could be an architect by background, or a quantity surveyor by background. It doesn't matter what their background is per se, but they need to be somebody that's not in the trenches doing the design work or the project management work. They need to be an independent person that manages the whole project all the way through. So they are actually appointed alongside some of the initial design team consultants, if you like, that help to formulate all the project brief and the project initiation documents. That person is there from the very beginning. I mean, I'll give you an example as to why this works well, going back into the world of PPP. In PPPs, you have the special purpose vehicle, which is the special company set up to deliver that project. And then you have the client who has sponsored that project to be undertaken. And my experience is the manager of the SPV is there from the bidding, when they first do the bid to get the work in the first place, all the way through the design process, all the way through the construction process, and then into operations. They have complete continuity of knowledge. My own experience as a client was they may or may not have been involved during the procurement and early negotiations and design stage, depending on how robust their team was. Often that they were supported by consultants. As soon as that stage was done, they disappeared. The estates team often weren't involved in the construction process, so they didn't see how that construction was being done. So they got to the operational stage. The estates department was suddenly handed this brand spanking new building, and they didn't know anything about it. They didn't know how the contract worked. They didn't know anything. So they had total lack of continuity all the way through the project, even though they were the client. So what I'm saying is the point person here needs to be through this project. And I know we all change our careers and what have you. So you've got to have the ability to hand over, but you need to have a continuity of person all the way through the life cycle of the project. So they have knowledge about the knowledge, if you like. So there's no hidden agendas here. There's no hidden information. Everything's there for everybody to use.
Good. All right. I see we have some, if persons don't ask some questions, I'm going to call on some persons to ask some questions. I've got some friends and some colleagues here who have been on some fairly large projects. So, Mr. Weeks, I don't often get to see you in forums like this, so welcome. You would have managed some big projects in Barbados. I think particularly of the Kensington Oval last time we had World Cup. A system like this, would it have made a difference to how you would have approached a project of that magnitude then? Would you like to make a comment in that general regard?
Thanks, Vincent. Good evening to everyone. Yes, certainly the system that is outlined by Ian wouldn't have been useful. The challenge I find, though, for projects here, I mean, when I first started out in the business, designers were given a long time to prepare tender documents and drawings and so on. As time went on, that time kept being shorter and shorter. And as people started using trade sections and so on, the urge to start quick became greater and greater. And I just wondered, within the Barbadian context, particularly since he's purporting that a lot of time needs to be spent at the beginning and a lot of time needs to be spent with the client developing the brief, because quite often, sometimes I find clients don't exactly know what it is that they're doing. Sure. I just wonder how practical, in real terms, it would be, and whether he and his colleagues had any experience in converting people to see that this is the way to go.
Ian?
Well, I think you picked up on a very important point there, Miles, that go back in time, people did spend more time on the documentation and taking it to get it right. But then there became this time pressure to get it done quickly, etc. And we all know that when you do it quickly, that's when the mistakes come in. So if you rush things, you overlook things, and the mistakes come in. So my opinion is, and I accept this is not necessarily an easy sell, but it's an educational process that's got to be gone through. By educating the clients that by rushing at the beginning, you're going to pay a huge penalty later on, because they'll find that they're not getting what they want, or the quality is not there. There's mistakes on the design because the design team was pushed into a tight corner to get things done quickly, and they didn't look at things properly. I mean, I'll give you an example of another hospital job I was involved in my very early days as a QS. And I was measuring all the ceiling finishes. To be able to do that, you had to know what your roof structure or ceiling structure was above the structural element. And I came to this corner that was a composite between timber, structural concrete, and structural steel. And I thought, hang on, there's a hole here. The whole thing doesn't sit together. Is it my naivety as a young QS not knowing how to read the drawings, or is there a fundamental problem here? So I put it back to the design team. They came back and said, oops, we've cocked that up. We haven't looked at it because we had 3 different teams doing it in fast order, and they hadn't looked at the coordination where these 3 elements of the roof came together. And if that had gone on to the construction team, there would have been huge delays whilst they redesigned that whole section of the building. So time pressure is great in one respect, but it always comes back and bites you later on, in my opinion. And it's about re-educating people to say, we've got to do this right first time. We've all heard that principle before, but by doing it right first time, you save so much later on, because there won't be delays and disruption during the construction process, so the building will be finished on time and on budget.
Following on from Miles's point, Ian, is this plan only efficient or effective for very large projects, or do you foresee this being able to be distilled and used for smaller projects as well?
I've been asked this before. I mean, obviously, scale helps with anything like this. I mean, if you put this into practice on a basic house, then you wouldn't necessarily go into all the detail that this whole system enables. But you can still use some of the principles and elements of that by getting what the homeowner wants and how that's designed, even on a smaller scale. So you can use the principles out of this on any scale of project. But in terms of putting all the systems in place that we've talked about, using BIM and all of that element of stuff, you really need a reasonable size project to make it much more efficient. But you can use elements of this all the way across the piece, if you like.
Yeah. I'm going to ask another colleague, hoping not to put persons on the spot, but I think this is important engagement, and as professionals, we need to discuss these things openly. Marissa, are you in a position that you can answer a question?
Sure. I joined very late, unfortunately, so I missed the presentation.
That's okay, but I'm just going to call upon your personal experience, so you don't need a presentation for that one. Marissa, you've in a unique position that you have worked on several hospital projects in Barbados. In terms of that upfront planning with the client and really appreciating and understanding what the client needs before the project gets going under a time constraint. I mean, what type of challenges does that throw up for the design team?
Well, I would say the first thing that comes to mind is that in a hospital setting in Barbados, well, the main hospital that we're talking about, usually the client and the user client, they are busy working. And so it's very difficult for them to dedicate time to planning and developing a brief while executing their daily tasks. So that's never very efficient That part of it is never very efficient. And so if you start wrong, you know, things can go wrong. The other thing is the client, sometimes doctors and nurses, they're good at medicine, but they're not good at understanding. They know their routines, but they're not good at understanding how the building systems work. And they know their part, but they may not appreciate housekeeping. They may not appreciate services and so on. So I would advocate for any hospital project, which is usually an active site, that the persons who are dedicated to developing the brief would be relieved of whatever duties and
Marissa, you've muted. I'm not sure if something's happened.
sorry, I have a call coming in.
Okay, sorry, okay. All right, so Ian, based on what Marissa is saying about having persons who are assigned basically to a project team, having that elbow room basically to help develop the brief properly, how important is that from the client's point of view? Because if you are sitting as a member of the client's team, does that then become your responsibility in terms of the stakeholder engagement? Or do you try then to integrate that stakeholder engagement in this process?
I think it's critical that the client has to have the requisite skills in his team to be able to work with the design team. Now, it may be that you bring specialist consultants, consultant doctors, or what have you in even part-time to enable them to work with a design team. I mean, I worked on a very, very large hospital in London. And I was there as the facilities manager. And it was a massive hospital, and we were going to take on operational responsibility from day one for the existing hospital. The construction program was 20 years on a phase, or 14 years over a phased period, because you had to take an element of the building down, rebuild a new one, etc., etc. And my team, which was the FM team, I actually had an architect fully embedded in the FM team, looking at the design from an operational point of view. That particular hospital actually had an adjacencies team looking at the workflows of how the hospital should operate efficiently, because this is a huge, huge hospital. So they did actually impart that dedication. But the estates team was stretched to the gunwale and didn't get involved in the maintenance side of it at all. Fortunately, we had some very skilled people there from the early days who could put input on the design of maintaining the equipment correctly. And even I was raising a number of issues, because this was a very high-story building. And for instance, they were putting all the major plant on the roof, as is typical. And I raised the question, well, how am I going to get all the big air handlers and boilers and everything else off the roof in 20 years' time? And they scratched their head and said, well, you're probably going to have to get the biggest UK crane to do that with blocking a main arterial road. So clearly it couldn't happen. So we had to redesign how the plant was to be distributed through the building so we could get it out 20 years down the line for maintenance, because the SPV were responsible for that building for 40 years. So every major piece of equipment in that building would have to come out. So I agree with Marissa, trying to get the client to understand this thing is important, but the client has to have that input, particularly in healthcare. That is just so critical. You've got to work out how you have your adjacencies, how you have your workflows all properly in that building and captured, so that when the design team, who are not clinicians, they're designers, they don't necessarily know what the workflow of a patient through a hospital is. They may have a good idea because they've probably designed a hospital before, but they don't fully necessarily understand the clinician's actual requirements. What type of equipment, we know the classics of the levered arm taps for the scrubs to operate with their elbows. But there's lots of other simple things that could help the clinician with their day-to-day life that a designer may not be aware of.
So Ian, let's go for a different look at this from a different angle. So Jonathan, I see that you're here in the chat with us this evening. From the electrical engineering point of view, and this is something that I've run into more often than not. In terms of having utility spaces designed to permit maintenance of buildings. Too often, we have these utility spaces where you have plumbing pipes and God knows what else all coming down in these shafts. And when you have to do a renovation or do a maintenance, they become a challenge. So Jonathan, from the electrical engineer's point of view, what would you like to add to this in terms of space for maintenance and making clients more aware of what's required, certainly on the services side? Oh, Jonathan said he doesn't have any mic. Okay. But certainly, Ian, that's a challenge. I know. I mean, I've done a site tour as part of a tender's team to look at a reno on a major West Coast hotel here. And when we got to the services shaft, it was quite astonishing, really. I mean, what are your thoughts in that regard? I mean, obviously, this system or any general planning system should really address these issues, no?
Absolutely. And what's behind the scenes and not seen or heard of often gets forgotten about, or it gets squeezed because it's not generating income from that building, like a hotel. They want to minimize the plant rooms because they want as many rooms in there that can generate rack rate income. But what's not thought of is the consequences of reducing that right down. I mean, I was talking to somebody about 6-9 months ago, and he was involved in, funny enough, another hospital. And they went to try and put all the electrical panels into the plant room and realized they wouldn't fit. They hadn't considered the sheer size of the electrical panels. So they ended up having to knock a hole in the end wall, which was a corridor, and butting part of the plant room 2 feet into the corridor to be able to fit the panels in.
Well,
And this was during construction.
right.
Nobody had even thought about this during the design phase, yet alone the briefing phase. So the disruption of suddenly a bit of the plant room having to be knocked out into a corridor, the implications of that on the corridor itself, is that may have reduced it down to be below the necessary flow for fire evacuation or what have you, was significant. And it just made the whole design piece look messy at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Because they hadn't sat down and thought it through correctly right at the very beginning.
I think Jonathan is giving us some support there. He says the coordination up front between services should also include for expansion down the road. I think that's also something that is overlooked too often, that anticipated expansion is not anticipated early on. He said, over my time design, I find there is normally a pushback from the client about giving up space for electrical and other services. So I guess, as you said, Ian, there is a general need to educate the clients a bit better as to what is required, and I guess to come back a little bit from this rush to get everything going and understand that certain things, especially the larger and the more complex the project is, a bit more care may need to be taken up front, so you're not wasting money down the road.
Absolutely. And this isn't going to be an easy turnaround. We've all gone down for the, get it done faster, 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 faster. And in reality, the statistics I put out at the beginning of this presentation, where McKinsey has said 98% of projects fail, that is damning. This isn't just 20% of buildings have problems. It's the vast majority of projects have problems of one sort or another because they haven't been thought through properly at the beginning, from an operational point of view, from a client requirement point of view, et cetera, et cetera. But by taking that extra time, you actually do save time and money later on. And it's about, in my opinion, in today's green agenda and sustainability, if you've got 2 speculative office buildings, put it into that context. If you put those into context against, say, two buildings going up by rival speculative office developers, and one rushes to get the thing done quick, done, finished, and the other one takes a bit more time, that can prove that the building is much more energy efficient, sustainable, etc., etc. The chances are in today's rental market, one that's got greater sustainability, even though it may not be any more expensive to rent, is likely to be rentable much more easily than the building that's just been thrown up. Because you've got a marketable piece coming off the back end. This building is going to be more efficient to run. It's more sustainable. It's met all the green credentials, LEED or what have you. And therefore, it's been worthwhile taking that bit of extra time to do it, because that landlord is likely to fill that space much more quickly. Because the tenants know that they're not going to have to spend so much money on electricity to chill the space or whatever it might be.
Right. We got a comment here from Safia Patel. I hope I've pronounced that name correctly. It says, Ian, have you been involved in any projects locally using your system? If so, have you noticed a difference in time management and more efficient project?
I have been involved in projects here. I've been based in Barbados for about 12 years now. But this is something we've literally only just finished crafting, if you like, and we're literally been launching this over the last few months. So at this moment in time, I have not done a live project in the region. It's something I would really like to be able to demonstrate. So I'm open to developers or clients that want to explore this further and help them take this journey on this. But I haven't actually delivered this specific system here at this moment in time. But I know from the experience that we've got as a team that it will produce benefits.
Okay, good. All right. Any other questions? Peter Sandiford, I see you're on the call. Peter, I know you've had some successful projects, some of which have won some awards. What's your experience been like into interacting with your clients to deliver those award-winning projects, Peter? Have you spent a lot of time up front explaining and really taking time to go through them to make sure they got what they needed at the end?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. I've been very fortunate. The clients that I've had in the past, in terms of winning the awards, have been very progressive and very open to allowing me to explore. So I've been very fortunate in that regards. But in terms of the software, the process that Ian is referring to, I find that unless everybody uses the software, it doesn't really benefit, it doesn't get to be used in its fullest capacity. So I'm working on a project now that would be, pretty intense, just complicated with several subcontractors and whatnot. And in terms of putting all the information together, the electrical, the mechanical, the all the different ACs and all those kinds of things, putting those together and having it cohesively put together in a package where information is easily disseminated. Because you talk about being transparent, which is key to any project. The challenge that I am encountering is not everybody is necessarily willing to learn how to incorporate these new BIM aspects into their everyday. Some may be too comfortable with the methodology that they're already using. They're not necessarily willing to try new things. They don't have time. They may see the benefits of the software, but may not be willing to participate and put in the hours that's required to learn how to use it and put it to its fullest, capacity. So the challenge that I see is incorporating this software with everybody. Everybody has to use it in order for it to work effectively. So it will be interesting to see how that can be overcome so that we can have the process that Ian is talking about, where you're not only working better, faster, and cheaper, but you learn and people realize that I could do this a lot easier and more efficiently if I just put the time in now to input the information and follow through with the using of the app. So that would be my challenge, my question to Ian in terms of, the success of the software and engaging the necessary specialists so we all work together as a team.
Yeah, that is the biggest challenge. You hit the nail right on the head. And as I say, there's a comment from Adecco Collymore pretty well saying the same thing, is integrating everybody onto the systems. What my experience in Barbados has been, and through the region, is architects seem to be willing to use BIM and the BIM systems. Structural engineers often do as well, but they use the Tekla system rather than, say, an AutoCAD structures system, because that's probably what they've always used. And therefore, it's how you integrate that and put that so that it ends up being integrated and confederated onto the one model. The challenge I see is the mechanical and electrical engineers often have not used this type of technology, and they're therefore not familiar with it. So there's a sort of a not an equal standing amongst all the design team of the use of BIM technologies and BIM software to make it happen, yet alone when you go further into the project management and the cost control and everything else. Now, some of those elements, I've got international people that can do that remotely at any rate. It's the key thing is trying to educate and bring everybody up to speed of the benefits of doing this. Because by coordinating across all the disciplines, you start to be able to run models on clash detection and things like that, so that you haven't got the classic air conditioning duct going across a beam and it doesn't fit. You sort that all out at the design stage with the 3D modeling. So you're right, Peter, it's getting everybody up to speed, and there is a reluctance on some elements, and some practices are quite small here. They're very good, but they're quite small. And therefore the investment for them is disproportionately large to what they think the benefits would be. But once they get that education and they get that, it's like anything, it takes time to learn how to use this and get up to speed. But once you're up to speed, you wonder why you never did it before.
I think Adecco is just saying something similar to what you just said. He's saying that the Caribbean market is much smaller than the UK, so it's not always financially feasible to hire the specialist skills.
Yeah.
But is it a case that if persons don't upskill, I mean, obviously by persons being here tonight, we may be preaching to the choir, but is it a case that if persons don't upskill that they'll be left behind, given that technology is constantly changing and clients, large clients, especially large corporate clients, may now be demanding that certain systems such as BIM be used on their projects because they are aware of the efficiencies that can be evolved.
Yeah, and I think that is the issue. And what we're trying to do is look at this in as cost-effective a way as possible. I mean, my journey in BIM over the last 2 years has been eye-opening. There are so many different systems out there that people look at and think, well, I'll need this and I'll need that and I'll need this, and that's got to be integrated, and there's data transfer. Well, in my opinion, a lot of it is not needed. It's just people bolting on things unnecessarily. The core systems around BIM design have been around for many, many years now. So the design team should be able to integrate that. It's then being able to use a platform with all the standard documentation to enable you to enable you to work together much more efficiently and start replicating that information. Mm-hmm. So for instance, the Planoly system that we've got has got a huge document management system, which is quite advanced, and that you can allow people to produce all a set of standard documents, and there's already a library of standard documents there. And you can actually say to the system, right, I want a project information document pulled together, putting 35 documents together into one document, and the system will then do that. Again, once you've got that there, then you can start replicating that across multiple projects. So you start to build up your speed from having built that database in the first place. Yes, each project will have its own nuances, but the underlying regulations will be the same. So the standards, the fire standards, the plumbing standards or what have you will always be the same. You just integrate those constantly from a database rather than having to pull them out and reintegrate them every single time.
Yeah, I mean, I think for those of us who've been in the industry for long enough time would understand and realize the importance of that data. Too often, perhaps, is not being recorded in the way that it should, so that you can easily retrieve it when you need to. That information from past projects, what projects that have gone right and those that have gone wrong, where the mistakes were made, so that you have that reference point. And I think what Adeko here is saying is quite relevant, is that in the next 5 to 10 years, AI will probably play a role in being able to pull that information and collate it in a lot quicker than obviously somebody having to flesh through that information. Andrew Smith, if you can hear me, I had the good fortune of working with Andrew. Andrew is a project manager by profession. Andrew, how would some of the challenging projects that you've worked on, a system like this, how would that have made a difference for you? Andrew, you're in a position to speak? I guess Andrew is not in a position to speak right now. But certainly, Ian, from your point of view as a project manager in the past, if this system was available to you 10 years ago, what sort of difference would it have made?
I think it would have made a big difference, providing the whole team was open to working in a fully collaborative way. The industry is too often wants to keep itself in its silos for whatever reason, and I'm not going to go into that.
Right.
We've all got our own opinions as to why we need to stay in silos or what have you. The information age is all about sharing, and we've got to work together for the common good. And the common good is the client at the end of the day. It's paying all of our bills to get the building that they want, whatever that building may be. And I think those of us that are enlightened enough to see that we've just got to break down the barriers, we've got to collaborate. As Deco said, AI and all virtual reality stuff is gathering pace now rapidly. It's changing monthly. Don't necessarily agree with all of it, and you've got to still watch what you're doing with what comes out of it. Like everything, you've got to check and circle back round. But if you enhance all of this properly, the benefits to you as a practice and for the client could be significant. And I think that here we've got a real golden opportunity of going from it always has been done this way type approach to really jumping forward to show that the Caribbean can be a leading light in the built environment. Even if the project is not that big and complex, we can still be shown by using new technologies, new methods of building and all that sort of thing for the better environment.
Grantley Haynes, can you speak? Grantley, are you in a position to speak right now?
See, Andrew's coming.
All right, so Andrew, go ahead.
Sorry, yes, in response to your question earlier, well, yeah, I can certainly see the benefits of this system, and it's something that we all should be using. But part of what he had also said is there's so many add-ons to this thing that it can seem so overwhelming and so overly complicated that unless you're able to distill it out to just what you need, and I guess that is also something that's quite important, because when you're trying to sell it, you're saying to a client or to the person who is the building is for or whatever, when they're not fully appraised as to what it can do for them and how simple it can be, and they don't necessarily need parts A, B, C, D, F. It's just the base that can work for them, and it will then stop them from having a lot of these problems where, like you're saying, the AC ducts don't fit or that type of thing. No, it certainly is something that we all should be using. But again, the same argument which he said earlier is that you might have the architect who is a bigger practice and the engineer who is a bigger practice, but then when you come on to the smaller guys, let's say the plumbers or the electricians or things like that, who are smaller firms and traditionally don't necessarily have all of that technology-based thing in their companies, it's kind of hard to onboard them at the same time. And we all need to be using it for it to be effective.
So in the Caribbean context, how do we integrate the smaller practitioner?
That is a challenge. Sorry, Andrew, carry on.
No, sorry, go ahead. That is a point, because I don't know necessarily the answer to that one.
I mean, it's not just here. That is an international issue in terms of how you get the smaller specialist engineers and providers on board with this, because they haven't necessarily got the wherewithal to do it. They're probably going to have to go along with it sooner or later. What we're trying to do is make the onboarding of that smaller element much more easily achieved. With the base system of Planoly, all the documentation is there that needs to be uploaded and worked on collaboratively. So it's bringing those small guys on in an integrated way. What we've also done is we've done a lot of research across all the different systems that sit out there, and there are many, many different systems. And what we're trying to do is distill this down to the bare minimum necessary to make this work. Because in my opinion, the more systems you bring in, that also opens itself up to mistakes. Because as each system talks to each other, if you haven't set it up right, then you've got all sorts of issues coming out of that as well. The data may not be transferring correctly. So a lot of this, yes, it's a sophisticated tool, but if you keep it as simple as possible, then you should be able to integrate and work to each other without overwhelming with all these different systems.
So the key may be to start small then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if you start with the basics of the architect and the structural engineer working on this together, and then maybe bolt the mechanical and electrical into that, and get the basic drawings done correctly. So you've got some base information, and then build it out slowly from there. And then by doing that, you're educating the wider market as to what can be done and how it can be achieved. So it's a matter of taking this step by step rather than going, say, to big bang and doing it all at once in one big go.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Andrew. I see we've got a comment made in the chat, which I'll just read. Says Peter Sandiford, George ADB, and I, and this is coming from Marissa, collaborated recently on a renovation design of a small lab. George was using AutoCAD 2D, and I was modeling with ArchiCAD, which was very useful MEP add-on. We tackled and solved AC duct and pipe issues in the tight ceiling plenum by hosting the process of design and modeling on Zoom. Granted, this was a very small scale, but we found a way to successfully collaborate. So I think that in itself speaks volumes. I mean, that collaboration is so very important, using what you have. But like you were saying, Ian, if everyone then eventually can migrate to a platform which can tie in various softwares that is out there, that certainly would help.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a stepping stone process. I'm not saying we just go big bang and away we go. We've got to take this in and bring it on step by step.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to explore how to do that further with me, I'm happy to have those discussions.
Yeah. All right. So I think we've had a very interesting discussion. It certainly has been interesting to me. I mean, I've been the contractor on the ground looking up at that flashing into that beam. So I understand exactly what you're saying, Ian.
Yeah.
And having to deal with those issues and point out or ring up the engineer and say, well, we've got a clash here we need to resolve. So I understand and appreciate very much. And especially when it's a time-sensitive project, obviously that puts a level of stress then on everyone to resolve that issue as quickly as possible. Whereas if it was modeled and thought through from the get-go, that's a challenge you would not have had to deal with on site because you would have identified that up front and would have dealt with it early on. So I very much can appreciate from that perspective, but I also can appreciate from the perspective of the facilities manager who has to come perhaps some years later and deal with issues in a building that they didn't have any involvement with, but having to basically figure out, well, what was done and why what was done because there's no record of the changes that might have occurred over time and how those changes have impacted the space. So what you're speaking of is a whole life cycle, which is something I think we really as professionals need to put a bit more thought towards, as opposed to, as you said, those silos that we tend to put ourselves into, but thinking of it as an entire process from start to end of the life cycle of the project. So Ian, I want to really thank you for coming this evening and telling us about this concept. And certainly you have my number, you know how to contact me. So as things progress, if you do get that project and you want to come back and tell us how the process of work in the Caribbean setting, that'll be great. I'm sure we'll all be interested in hearing of an update sometime down the road. So keep me
Absolutely.
posted as to how it goes. And I'm certainly interested. I think most persons will be interested to have you back once you've gotten an opportunity to put the system into place to hear
Sure.
how the process has worked for you in the Caribbean context. Yeah.
Yeah. Would welcome and I'd love to do that. So I'll keep you posted.
Cheers. Thank you, Ian,
Okay.
so much for
Thanks a
joining
lot.
us this evening. Thank you.
Yeah.
And for all of you who took the time to listen this evening, I also want to thank you. Just a quick reminder, this is a CPD event, so please do reach out to the Secretariat to claim your CPD points for your professional development, whichever association or organization you're affiliated to. So on behalf of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers, again, I want to extend thanks to Ian Rogers, and I want to bid all of you a fantastic evening and a great week. So good night to you all.
Cheers. Bye-bye.